The smell of burnt coffee and broken dreams hung thick in the air of Nexus Technologies' cramped development floor. Monica Sinclair sat hunched over 3 monitors, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of someone who'd been debugging legacy code for the past 14 hours straight. The notification that popped up in her peripheral vision should have been routine: team meeting, conference room B, 2 p.m. What made her blood run cold was the name attached as organizer: Blake Hawthorne, SVP of Digital Innovation. Blake Hawthorne, the CEO's golden child who'd waltzed into the company 6 months ago with his Wharton MBA still warm from the printer and a LinkedIn headshot that screamed, "I peaked in my college rowing team." Monica had watched him stumble through his first all-hands presentation, where he'd somehow managed to refer to their database as the Digital DNA Repository and their API endpoints as connectivity touchpoints. She'd physically cringed when he'd asked the development team to ideate some synergistic solutions for optimizing our tech stack's ROI metrics. The meeting invite had no agenda. That was never good. Monica pushed back from her desk, joints creaking in protest. She'd built Nexus's core system from the ground up, their entire supply chain management platform that now handled logistics for 12 Fortune 500 companies. What had started as a scrappy startup's desperate attempt to stay afloat had evolved into a $200 million revenue generator, all running on infrastructure Monica had architected in her studio apartment while surviving on ramen and spite. But success, she'd learned, was a double-edged sword in corporate America. The bigger the numbers got, the more the suits wanted to claim credit. Conference room B smelled like fear and cheap air freshener. Monica slipped in to find Blake already holding court, gesturing dramatically at a whiteboard covered in buzzword bingo: digital transformation, scalable solutions, customer-centric innovation. Seated around the oval table were the usual suspects: Miranda Chen, the head of engineering who'd never written a line of code but could recite Harvard Business Review articles like scripture; Trevor Walsh, the CTO who spent more time on industry podcast interviews than actually understanding their technology; and Ashley Rodriguez, the newest addition to leadership, whose primary qualification seemed to be her ability to nod enthusiastically at everything Blake said. Monica. Blake's voice carried that forced enthusiasm that made her skin crawl. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the future architecture of our platform ecosystem. She took a seat, noting how everyone's eyes seemed to avoid direct contact. That was definitely not good. "I'll cut to the chase," Blake continued, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "The board has approved a strategic restructuring initiative. We're bringing in some external consulting talent to modernize our approach." Monica's stomach dropped. External consulting talent was corporate speak for "we're replacing you with someone who costs 3 times as much and understands half as much." "What kind of restructuring?" she asked, keeping her voice level. Blake's eyes lit up like he'd been waiting for this question. "We're transitioning to a more collaborative development model. Instead of having one person siloed with all the institutional knowledge," his gaze briefly met hers, "we're building a distributed team structure with clear documentation and handoff procedures." The words hit like ice water. Monica had heard this speech before, in other companies, delivered to other engineers who'd made the mistake of becoming indispensable. The classic corporate catch-22, make yourself invaluable, and they'll find a way to make you replaceable. "Who's leading this transition?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I'll be taking point on the technical oversight," Blake said, somehow managing to sound both humble and condescending simultaneously. "With support from our new senior solutions architect, Brandon Westfield. He's coming from Tesla, incredible background in scalable systems." Brandon Westfield. Monica filed the name away, already planning to look up his GitHub profile. She'd bet money it would be either empty or full of forked repositories with minimal commits. "And my role in this transition?" she asked. Miranda Chen finally spoke up, her voice carrying the tone of someone reading from a prepared script. "We'd like you to focus on knowledge transfer and documentation. Make sure all your institutional knowledge is properly captured and accessible." Knowledge transfer. Documentation. The corporate equivalent of asking someone to dig their own grave. Monica nodded slowly. I see. And when does this transition begin? Immediately, Blake said. Brandon starts Monday. We'd like to have a comprehensive handoff completed within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. To document 7 years of architecture decisions, custom implementations, and the kind of deep system knowledge that lived in her head because she'd bled for every line of code. 2 weeks to package up her life's work and hand it over to someone who probably couldn't tell a REST API from a RESTful service. Of course, Monica said, her voice steady as granite. I'll get right on that documentation. Blake's smile widened. Fantastic. I knew you'd be a team player about this. As the meeting dissolved into small talk about weekend plans and office renovations, Monica sat quietly, her mind already racing. They thought they were playing chess, moving pieces around a board to optimize their position. They had no idea they were about to play a game where she controlled all the rules. That afternoon, Monica began what she would later refer to as the documentation project. On the surface, it looked like exactly what they'd asked for: comprehensive technical documentation of Nexus's entire system architecture. She created wiki pages, drew detailed diagrams, wrote step-by-step procedures. Everything was perfectly organized, professionally written, and completely compliant with their request. What they didn't realize was that Monica had spent 7 years building a system so complex, so interconnected, and so dependent on institutional knowledge that true documentation would require a PhD dissertation. What she gave them was the equivalent of a cookbook that listed all the ingredients but somehow forgot to mention the cooking temperatures. She documented every public API endpoint but somehow missed the critical rate-limiting configurations. She provided database schemas but omitted the crucial indexing strategies that kept queries from grinding to a halt. She outlined the deployment process in meticulous detail but failed to mention the 17 different environment variables that needed to be set just right, or the system would crash spectacularly. Most importantly, she said nothing about the authentication layer she'd built into the core modules, an elegant piece of code that required her personal cryptographic signature to deploy certain critical components. Not malicious, not sabotage, just good security practice. The kind of thing any competent security audit would require. Monday arrived like a funeral procession. Monica watched from her desk as Blake paraded Brandon Westfield around the office like a prize bull at a county fair. Brandon was exactly what she'd expected: mid-30s, startup casual wardrobe, and the kind of confident ignorance that came from having never encountered a problem he couldn't solve by throwing more servers at it. Monica. Blake called out, gesturing her over. I'd like you to meet Brandon. Brandon, this is Monica, our legacy systems specialist. Legacy systems specialist. 3 months ago, she'd been the chief architect. Now she was legacy. Great to meet you, Brandon said, extending a hand with the kind of firm grip that screamed, I read a book about power handshakes. Blake's told me so much about the impressive work you've done here. I'm excited to dive into the codebase and see what optimizations we can implement. Optimizations. Monica almost smiled. I'm sure you'll find it educational. Over the next few days, Monica watched the show unfold from her newly relocated desk. They'd moved her to a corner cubicle, citing better collaboration opportunities. Brandon threw himself into the code with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never encountered a truly complex system. She could see him through the glass conference room walls, squinting at printouts of her documentation, frantically Googling error messages, and having increasingly animated conversations with Blake. The first cracks appeared on Thursday. Blake appeared at her cubicle, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Brandon's having some trouble with the deployment pipeline. Could you give him a quick rundown? A quick rundown. 7 years of architecture decisions and custom implementations, condensed into a quick rundown. Of course, Monica said sweetly. What specifically is he struggling with? The whole database thing. It's not connecting properly. Monica nodded sympathetically. Ah, yes. The database connection protocols. That's covered in section 4.7 of the documentation. Did he configure the connection pooling parameters? Blake blinked. The what parameters? Connection pooling. It's essential for maintaining stable database connections under load. The default configuration will work for development, but production requires custom tuning based on query patterns and concurrent user load. Blake's face went through several expressions at once. Right. Could you just show him? Real quick? I'd be happy to schedule a knowledge transfer session, Monica replied. Should I send a meeting invite for next week? Next week? Blake's voice cracked slightly. We were hoping to have the new system deployed by Friday. Friday. Tomorrow. Monica maintained her expression of helpful concern. That's ambitious. Has Brandon completed the integration testing yet? The look on Blake's face told her everything she needed to know. They hadn't done integration testing. They probably hadn't even done unit testing. They'd taken her documentation, assumed it was complete, and tried to rebuild a 7-year-old system in 4 days. Let me talk to Brandon, Blake said, already backing away from her desk. See what he needs. What Brandon needed, as it turned out, was a miracle. Monica spent the rest of the day watching the increasingly frantic activity in the conference room. Blake paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. Brandon sat surrounded by laptop screens, looking like someone who'd just realized he'd volunteered to defuse a bomb without any training. Miranda Chen made several appearances, each time leaving looking more stressed than before. By 6 p.m., most of the office had cleared out. Monica was packing up her desk when Trevor Walsh, the CTO, appeared beside her cubicle. Monica, he said quietly. We need to talk. They walked to his office in silence. Trevor closed the door and gestured to a chair. How bad is it? He asked without preamble. Monica considered her response carefully. How bad is what, exactly? Don't play games. The deployment is scheduled for tomorrow, and Brandon looks like he's about to have a nervous breakdown. Blake won't admit it, but I can see the writing on the wall. How bad is the situation? Monica leaned back in her chair. That depends on what they're trying to deploy. The full system migration. Everything running on the new architecture Brandon designed. Monica blinked. The new architecture? As in, a complete rewrite of the existing system? Trevor nodded grimly. In 4 days? Monica's voice remained steady, but inside, she was marveling at the sheer audacity of their stupidity. Without regression testing? Without load testing? Without even basic integration verification? Trevor rubbed his temples. Blake said the documentation was comprehensive. That it would be straightforward to migrate. The documentation is comprehensive, Monica said carefully. For someone who understands the underlying principles and architectural decisions. But rebuilding a system isn't the same as following a recipe. You need to understand why each component exists, how they interact under stress, what the failure modes are, and how to recover when things go wrong. Can it be fixed by tomorrow? Monica shook her head. A proper migration would take months. Even with a full development team and complete access to all the legacy code, you're looking at extensive testing phases, gradual rollout procedures, fallback strategies. What they're attempting is like trying to perform heart surgery based on a Wikipedia article. Trevor was quiet for a long moment. What would you need to make it work? Full system access, a competent development team, and about 6 months. What about just keeping the current system running? Monica paused, choosing her words carefully. The current system is stable and fully functional. But. She let the word hang in the air. But. The deployment keys for critical modules are tied to specific authentication protocols. If someone tries to deploy unauthorized changes, the system will lock down as a security measure. Trevor's face went pale. Are you saying Brandon's deployment will crash the system? I'm saying the system is designed to protect itself from unauthorized modifications. It's a feature, not a bug. Trevor stared at her for a long moment. What are our options? Monica spread her hands. Cancel the migration and keep the current system running. Or bring in someone with proper authorization to oversee the deployment. Someone like you. Someone like me. Trevor was quiet for several minutes, staring out his office window at the parking lot below. Finally, he looked back at Monica. What would it take? What would what take? To bring you back. Properly. Not as a legacy systems specialist or a knowledge transfer consultant. As the architect you've always been. Monica felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, but she kept her expression neutral. That would depend on the terms. Friday morning arrived like the apocalypse, if the apocalypse came with breakfast pastries and nervous energy. Monica arrived at her usual time to find the office already buzzing with barely contained panic. Blake stood in the center of the development floor, gesturing wildly at a laptop screen while Brandon frantically typed commands that clearly weren't working. Miranda Chin paced back and forth behind them, occasionally stopping to peer over Brandon's shoulder and ask unhelpful questions like, "Can't you just restart it? And what does that error message mean?" Trevor Walsh sat at a nearby desk, phone pressed to his ear, presumably explaining to someone higher up the food chain why their Friday deployment might not happen as scheduled. Monica settled into her cubicle with her coffee and opened her email. 3 messages from Blake, 2 from Miranda, and 1 from Trevor, all marked urgent and all essentially asking the same question, "Can you fix this?" She deleted them all. At 10 a.m., the fire alarm began sounding. Not the building's actual fire alarm, the metaphorical one that goes off when a company realizes it's about to miss a major deadline with catastrophic consequences. Blake appeared at Monica's cubicle, his usual swagger completely gone, replaced by something that looked like barely controlled desperation. "Monica," he said, his voice tight. "We need your help." Monica looked up from her screen with mild interest. "Oh? What kind of help?" "The deployment, it's not going as smoothly as we'd hoped." "Not going as smoothly." Monica glanced over at Brandon, who was now literally pulling his hair while staring at a screen full of red error messages. "What seems to be the problem?" Blake swallowed hard. "Everything." "Everything?" "The database won't connect. The API endpoints are returning 500 errors. The authentication system is completely locked down. Brandon says the whole architecture is corrupted, but that can't be right because we followed your documentation exactly." Monica nodded sympathetically. "That does sound frustrating. Have you checked the system logs?" "The what?" "The system logs. They should tell you exactly what's failing and why. It's all covered in section 12.3 of the documentation." Blake's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like defeat. "Monica, I need you to be straight with me. Can this be fixed?" Monica considered the question carefully. "Define fixed. Can we get the system running by end of business today?" "Which system? The new one Brandon built, or the existing one that was working fine yesterday?" Blake closed his eyes. "The existing one." "Can we roll back and get the existing system running?" "That depends," Monica said. "Did anyone create a backup before starting the migration?" The color drained from Blake's face. "A backup?" "A backup. You know, a complete copy of the working system that you can restore if something goes wrong. It's standard procedure for any major deployment. Section 15.1 of the documentation covers backup and recovery procedures in detail." Blake stared at her for a long moment. "We don't have a backup." Monica managed to look appropriately concerned. "That's unfortunate. Without a backup, recovery becomes significantly more complex." But not impossible? Not impossible, Monica agreed. But it would require deep system knowledge, access to all the original configuration files, and probably some custom scripting to rebuild the authentication layers. How long would that take? Monica pretended to think. For someone familiar with the system? Maybe a day or two. For someone learning as they go. She shrugged. Weeks, maybe months. Blake's shoulders sagged. What would you need? Full administrative access, a written request from senior management, and my original job title restored. Your original job title? Chief Architect. With the corresponding salary and benefits. Blake nodded frantically. Done. Whatever you need. Monica smiled. I'll need that in writing. 2 hours later, Monica sat in the CEO's office, watching Nathan Cross, the company's founder and CEO, sign the paperwork that officially reinstated her as chief architect with a 40% salary increase and equity options that made her one of the company's largest individual shareholders. I have to ask, Nathan said as he slid the signed documents across his desk. Did you know this would happen? Monica met his gaze steadily. I knew that attempting to migrate a complex system without proper planning, testing, and institutional knowledge was a high-risk proposition. Nathan leaned back in his chair. And Blake? Blake will learn from this experience, Monica said diplomatically. I'm sure he'll be very careful about future technology decisions. And Brandon? Monica shrugged. Brandon is talented, I'm sure. But talent without experience can be dangerous in complex systems. Maybe he'd be better suited to a startup environment where he can learn without risking established infrastructure. Nathan nodded slowly. What about the system? Can it be recovered? Monica smiled. Give me 4 hours. It took 3. By 5 p.m., Nexus Technologies' system was not only fully operational but running better than it had in months. Monica had used the recovery process to implement several optimizations she'd been planning, fix some nagging performance issues, and upgrade several security protocols. The system that came back online was more robust, more secure, and more efficient than what they'd started with. Blake spent the afternoon cleaning out his desk. Nathan had been diplomatic about it, referring to it as a strategic realignment of responsibilities, but everyone understood what had happened. Brandon lasted until the following Tuesday before submitting his resignation, citing cultural fit concerns. Miranda Chen requested a transfer to the marketing department, where her talents for buzzword generation would be put to better use. Trevor Walsh, to his credit, approached Monica the following week with a genuine apology and a request to understand what had gone wrong so it wouldn't happen again. The problem, Monica explained as they sat in his office, wasn't technical. It was hubris. You can't treat engineering like a commodity. You can't assume that someone with impressive credentials can immediately understand and improve a system they've never worked with. And you definitely can't attempt a complete system migration without proper planning, testing, and respect for the complexity involved. Trevor nodded. What would you have done differently? If I were planning a system migration? First, I'd spend months understanding why the current system works the way it does. Then I'd create a detailed migration plan with multiple fallback options. Then I'd implement it gradually, in phases, with extensive testing at each step. And I'd never, ever attempt to replace the core system architect before the migration was complete. And if you were in Blake's position? Monica considered the question. I'd have asked questions instead of making assumptions. I'd have treated the existing system as a valuable asset rather than a legacy problem to be solved. And I'd have respected the knowledge and experience of the people who built it. Lessons learned, Trevor said. Lessons learned, Monica agreed. 6 months later, Nexus Technologies completed its largest funding round in company history. Monica's system had scaled to handle 23 Fortune 500 clients, and her architecture had become the foundation for 3 new product lines. She'd built a team of 12 engineers, all of whom understood that engineering was about solving real problems, not chasing buzzwords. Blake Hawthorne had landed a position at a startup that specialized in AI-powered logistics solutions. Monica had heard through the grapevine that they'd burned through their series of funding in 8 months and were struggling to find investors for their next round. Some lessons, apparently, took longer to learn than others. As for Monica, she sat in her corner office, an actual office now, with windows and everything, reviewing the architectural plans for Nexus's next major expansion. Her computer showed 3 monitors worth of code, system metrics, and development timelines. Her coffee was perfect, her team was brilliant, and her equity options had just vested. She'd learned something important about corporate politics. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being indispensable, and making sure everyone knows it. The notification that popped up on her screen was from Nathan Cross, board meeting next week. They want to discuss making you CTO. Interested? Monica smiled and typed back, "Send me the job description. I'll let you know if the role meets my standards." Outside her window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Monica leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd built something remarkable, watched others try to take credit for it, and then demonstrated exactly why experience, knowledge, and respect for complexity matter more than credentials and buzzwords. Some battles, she reflected, are won not by fighting harder, but by letting your opponents defeat themselves. And sometimes, the sweetest victory is simply watching the system you built protect itself.